views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of Time Warner Cable.
Welcome to The Bottom Line. My name is Dana Connors, and I'm pleased to be your host for this monthly program brought to you by the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. Each month, we have the opportunity to share with you some of the ideas, some of the issues, as well as the initiatives at work in our state to help grow our economy. And that certainly applies to the topic for today's program, that is transportation. I know it's also something very important to the viewers. You ask, how do I know that? Well, there's two words that would best answer that question. One is demand, and the other is need. And when you look at the recent bond issue that passed by a very strong vote, 75% of our voters favoring that bond issue, clearly the need is expressed by that very vote alone. And when you look at the role and the demand for passenger rail service in our state, then that clearly expresses why the answer is so evident. And those happen to be the two issues that we're going to talk about today and the impact on our state and the state's economy as well as transportation. Passenger rail service, which is the one we begin with, as well as the bond issue that will follow up in the next segment. Passenger rail. When I think of that and moving people by train, the old expression, what's old is new again, comes to mind. Because as we think back to the early part of the 20th century, moving people by trains in this state was a very strong way of moving people around. It went away, only to come back again in the first part of the 21st century, which is our first topic. In these first 14, 15 years, we've seen strong evidence of rail movement, passenger-wise that is, in our state. And here to share with us that experience is none other than the Executive Director of the Northern New England Passenger Rail Authority, Patricia Quinn. Patricia, it's a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you here. A lot has happened in those 15 years.
It has.
Oh, well, 14 years actually, to be exact. Let's key it up this way. It's a month from now, December, going back to 2001. A train left Boston, the very first return trip, if you will, for decades. It landed after 145 miles in Portland to hundreds of people with high hopes. Fast forward 15 years. What's happened? We've served, 5,500,000 passengers, raised $80 million in revenues. Economic development has been spurred along the line. Trains have been added, round trips, I should say, have been added. Speeds have increased. Ooh, that's quite a success story.
It is.
Reflect on that.
Well, it has been an amazing journey throughout this course of the past 14 years. Again, as you said, on December 15th, 2001 was when the Downeaster made its very first round trip between Portland and Boston. Since then, we have carried more than 5,500,000 passengers, the equivalent of 438 million passenger miles. That's the number of miles that are off the roads. It's been an amazing journey. I think the service has far surpassed what people thought it would do. You know, it started off kind of as an amenity. It was a novelty. It was something people wanted to do once a year. But what we've really seen as it's evolved over the course of the last 15 years is that now it's really a viable, important, integral way of transportation. It is a means of transportation. People don't think of us as an attraction. It's a way to get from point A to point B. We've tried to focus, as you said, on the reliability of the service, making sure that we're on time, on the speed, making sure that we're time competitive, and also on customer satisfaction. And it's been very rewarding for me. I mean, the Amtrak crews that operate this service are the best across the country, and that has been demonstrated month over month, year over year, as the Downeaster sits at the very top of Amtrak's customer satisfaction survey. So it's been a great experience.
Well, I'm struck by that. You're right in terms of when we first, and I was one of those who said, you know, I was commissioner when the initiative was brought forward. It was in a form of a referendum, but we accepted it, or recommended the legislature accept it so it wouldn't go to a vote. and a lot of criticism at that time because it was thought to be a wild dream that just wasn't, it wasn't going to really come even close to the level of service. And I frankly was probably one of those who never would have believed that it would have achieved the level of success that you see today. And I'm also, we all know and recognize that on the interstate a lot of development takes place, but I'm also struck by the level of development that has occurred because of the Downeaster and the service to the Portland area to begin with.
Absolutely, and that's been one of the really wonderful things to see is the change in communities. I mean, look at what's happening in Biddeford and Saco with the redevelopment of those mills, people moving in. Again, people want access to areas, and passenger rail is a very important component of a balanced transportation system. When you look at how things have changed over the course of the last 15 years, I mean, first of all, we serve such a wide variety of passengers. We serve people going back and forth to work, students going back and forth to school. We carry thousands of school groups every year that are going to Boston for educational trips. We bring in hundreds of thousands of tourists every year. So it really is a variety. And having these small communities be a stop on this service that links, you know, Maine with really the economic center of northern New England spurs not only ridership, but again, that economic development. Brunswick, the Brunswick station was really a development that was really the foundation for that was Brunswick Station, was that the train was going to come there. And in fact, that developer didn't even break ground on the hotel that's on that property until he knew for sure that the train was coming. So we've seen it all along the line, and even in Thompson's Point now in Portland, that development there with the access by rail transportation, a very important component.
I know the important thing is, you know, that 145 miles from Boston to Portland, Portland to Boston, is similar to an interstate system. It is the main artery, if you will. And we've had one extension and others are being considered. But before I go to that, in keeping that main line as strong as possible, because without it, the rest is kind of difficult to accomplish anything. What are some of the things in your mind that's on schedule or you'd like to see accomplished to keep that strong? What's next?
Well, you're right, and that we focus very strongly on the core service is what we call it, and I often compare it to being the trunk of a tree, that if you don't have a strong trunk, you can't possibly support limbs and branches. The 145 miles actually from Brunswick to Boston is where our focal point is right now. 3 years ago, we expanded service from the terminus in Portland to Brunswick. Right now, only 2 of our 5 round trips a day extend up that far. Right. And so one of our major initiatives has been that layover facility, which has been very controversial. Yeah. But it's really important from a very pragmatic standpoint to move the garage where the trains are cared for at the beginning and end of the day to the end of the line, which is Brunswick. By doing that, we'll be able to add immediately another round trip, 3 round trips a day, and then eventually all 5 round trips a day. So it's that core service. We're looking at adding capacity. And when I say capacity, I mean another track. If you think of the railroad of 145 miles, about 80% of that is only one track. So think about going from Portland to Waterville and having a 1-lane highway 80% of the way. How would you get around each other? So we talk capacity, we talk about adding tracks so that it gives us more flexibility in our schedule, keeps us more reliable. And another important thing is it really supports the movement of freight. The investments that have been made on behalf of the Downeaster in the main line that connects, you know, Maine to the rest of New England, those improvements have helped to support the movement of goods as well.
Because it's essentially the same system.
It's exactly the same system.
Certainly the service, as successful as it is, and it clearly is a story that's shared countrywide. Amtrak is one of the greatest fans of this. We've had our challenges and we've had our critics. One of the challenges has been this past winter, 2014, 2015. I think it's important to talk about that because for a while it dampened our spirits, to say the least, but I think we moved beyond it. And it came about because of harsh winter, as I recall, the bridges that the MBTA were working on, and of course the track upgrades, the ties and so forth. What did we do and how are we doing now?
Well, one of the downfalls of having continued growth and success year after year is when something goes wrong, it seems like a really big deal. So
Everybody feels it, yeah.
Right, and we did feel it. And it was a really bad year. You're absolutely right. I mean, a combination of infrastructure improvements, infrastructure constraints, combined with just bad weather and construction projects that were scheduled and took longer than planned. It was a really bad year for us. We had to cancel more than 500 trains last year. The trains that did operate throughout between April and July were very, very slow. And it really it hurt our reputation. And we've worked very hard to try to get that back. The good news is that those were all instances in time. They're all in the past. The upgrades to the track have been made. Service is good. We're back reliable again. Most of the trains are on time every single day. Ridership has come back. Our commuters are back. And actually, it's nice because on a regular basis now, 2 or 3 times a week, we actually get people that write to us that thank us for the service, tell us good things about the service, which I think is a little bit unique.
Yeah, very unique, actually.
Yeah.
We mentioned, we've only got a couple minutes left, but I want to be sure that you'd mentioned that probably some of the greatest criticisms has been the extension, and more specifically, in the beginning, the location. But there was a process that really defined that location. And then the layover facility. Construction has begun.
Yes, it has.
It's essential to minimize a lot of the environmental concerns, as well as to get that third trip that you spoke of a moment ago. Where are we in that process right now? Work has begun. I understand there's still an appeal pending before DEP.
There is. The construction did begin on October 16th. The neighborhood group that opposed the location of the facility has filed an appeal with the Department of Environmental Protection to pull our stormwater permit. The hearing is being held next week. And obviously, we have a lot of confidence in the work that's been done. We've done a tremendous amount of due diligence, have great people, great main contractors on board that are building that facility to the highest standards. And we really went through a lot of work to make sure that we gathered public input and we are building the right facility. Not everybody agrees, and I think that's what happens sometimes, but this really is the right thing for the service.
I agree. Let's talk about Lewiston Auburn. A lot has been talked about, high expectations, real need, desire to have it there. Where are we in that process of evaluating and doing the due diligence?
Well, the legislature approved some money to do a study, which I would rather call it a plan, a service plan, to look at what kind of service would best meet the needs of the people in Lewiston Auburn from a transportation component, from an economic development standpoint. And so we'll hopefully over the course of the next year or two be looking at that and trying to see what the travel patterns are there, what the needs are, where to site a station, who might ride it, and then our job would be to make recommendations regarding what kind of a service would best suit that. A feeder service into the Downeaster service, would it go all the way to Portland, how many frequencies, what type of equipment? There are many, many options, and again, if you look at the Downeaster, Brunswick to Boston as being the core service with the big set of equipment that carries the masses, having some branch lines, I think it's time to look at that in seriousness.
You're not going to believe this, but our 12 minutes is up. You've done a splendid job, and let me be the first to commend you and the staff for all that you've been able to accomplish in a relatively short time and to bring back something that goes beyond just a memory. It's a real transportation alternative, and congratulations, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate your support.
We're going to be right back and talk with the Commissioner about the recent bond issue and the impact that has not only on transportation, but on our economy as well. Please stay tuned. Welcome back to The Bottom Line. I'm pleased to welcome to our show Commissioner David Bernhardt. David, it's a pleasure.
Yes, thank you for having me, Dana.
I wanted to speak with the guardian of all transportation in the state of Maine, and to begin with something that I find really quite remarkable, that Mainers have always appreciated transportation. But in this time when everything is financially scrutinized and really reviewed for the highest and best use of dollars, it's to your credit and remarkable, historic even, that the vote this year on a bond issue was 79% or 75%, who's counting, in favor of the transportation bond issue. That is a very strong statement in terms of both appreciation but also the need that is out there in our main public for transportation. Let's talk about that bond issue. $85 million, it generated another 121 in matching dollars for a little over $200 million. I know there were highways and bridges, but there was more. Can you break the bond issue down and talk about what it does, both in terms of transportation, but also relate it to the economic benefits that come from that?
Yes, so it's broken down in two parts. You have 68 million goes toward that typical highway and bridge function, and then there's 17 million that goes to the other modes, that multimodal side. And on the highway and bridge, a good portion of that is going to go to bridges. We just recently put out a report. It's called Keeping Our Bridges Safe. We were seeing that we were only spending about half what we needed to do to really move that needle. And so we're putting a lot of resources into our bridge. We're not slowing down on the highway side, but we are putting resources that we haven't because we feel that's so important. When we go and we post a bridge and you end up having to truck your product an extra 20 to 40 miles, that has a huge economic impact. So we think that's important. I believe the state thinks it's important. So we're leaning toward bridges. Now on the 17 million, that multimodal side, we're spending money on ports, we spend money on freight rail, passenger rail, which was discussed earlier, and bike ped. So it's those modes that don't typically get the highway funding. We only receive around $8 million per year into the multimodal account, and that usually comes from the car rental tax, and it comes from aviation fuel tax and that kind of stuff. So we really need that. So we typically break the bond to 80-20. We've been spending a lot of money on our ports. All you have to do is anybody's in Portland and go down to the International Marine Terminal and see what we've been doing down there. I was just recently reading that in 2012, the export out of that port was around $215,000 worth of exports. Today, it's over $8 million in exports. The imports is up to $10 million. Matter of fact, recently out of that port, they're exporting more than they're importing in value. And that is huge, tremendous for the economic opportunity. Because this stuff, you're talking, frozen lobster, you're talking blueberries, potatoes, you're talking all kinds of stuff that are produced right here in Maine. So that's been a big push for us too.
Well, it also reflects what our economy is all about today. It's a worldwide economy. It's not our state next door or our region. That's truly significant, but it's remarkable how Maine's products can reach every corner, and it's incumbent upon transportation to provide that gateway. So I think what you're saying really does reflect both an economic dimension, but intermodal and getting there, multimodal in the way we do it, and I think that's to your credit. I know you well enough to know, as a matter of fact, you came to the department, when I came to the department in 1984, your whole career has been devoted to transportation and the people of Maine. That's quite a statement, buddy.
Yeah, it has changed it's changed.
Probably better, since the commissioner was here at the time.
No. But I mean, we focused a lot back then. It was highways and bridges, and that's what it was. But what's interesting is that we're really getting into the logistics side. It's about moving goods, services, and people. And so, and it's about being modal agnostic, kind of. We look at all the modes. They're all important, both rail, highway, bridge, port, shipping, and we need to make investments in them so our shippers, our customers, have those opportunities to basically expand where they're, bringing their goods or shipping their goods. And you need all modes. So we really are getting into the logistics where in the past we were not into that. So.
Let me ask you this. I know that you by nature are a planner, and that I know that you're looking down the road. What can we expect next? Can we anticipate another bond issue in 2016, 17? What's on the horizon?
Yes. What we did is we put together a 10-year bonding package looking at the revenues that were going to come in on the general fund side, and that The state is pretty conservative on their bonding. Usually
Yes, they
you
are.
want to stay under that 5% debt to revenue ratio. We're at that now. We're below the 5%. So we put a package together looking out 10 years, and we can bond out 10 years easily and stay under that, because you're paying off bonds at the same time you're creating bonds. So we put a two-year package in this last session. It was something new for the legislature, so I understand they only wanted to do the 1 year. They did ask me in appropriations, you're not getting that second year, what are you going to do? And I told them that I'm going to be sitting in this chair again asking for the 90 million. So
So that is the request, 90 million?
the request is going to be somewhere in that
That
range,
vicinity,
in that vicinity, because it can be done, and we need those funds to do those things that we're doing now.
I presume it will continue to place an emphasis on the bridge issue that you spoke of and be multimodal as well?
Multimodal and bridge is usually, the breakdown would be 72 million in that highway and bridge and around 18 million in the multimodal side to continue to do the things that we need to do. It's important. It's really important because at a federal level, we're not seeing the help yet, even though I see light at the end of the tunnel. Believe it or not, the Senate and the House are in conference to finally come up with a long-term reauthorization. Understand that we have, at a federal level, they're going to be in about their 34th continuing resolution since
Unbelievable.
2009. If you think about planning, you said planning, we look out 10, 20 years, but we put together a 3-year work plan. We have to make so many assumptions when we put that plan together on what we think we're going to get. And we're pretty good at it. We are fairly conservative. I would much rather add work than take work away.
Absolutely.
And
It's easier to explain.
so, but when we go in and I ask for a bond, we've already assumed some of that bonding level. So it is, if we don't get it, then we do have to take projects out of this work plan.
It's also appropriate in the few minutes that we have left to really bring to the attention of the viewing public how the federal government has kind of taken a walk. You mentioned how many times they've had continuing resolutions. Just recently, they're making an attempt to put 6 years with 3 years of funding. But at that same time, their gas tax, a traditional way of raising money to commit to states, and they are a strong partner or have been in the past, still remains at a 1993 or 94 level of 18 cents or 22 on diesel. But at the same time, we've experienced efficiency in vehicles, alternative fuels, and no accommodation has been made to pick up that lost revenue, so to speak. That's a tough hill to climb, isn't it? No pun intended.
It is a tough hill to climb, and what states are doing is they're doing a lot of this on their own because they have to, because they're not coming through. What they're doing now, instead of raising the gas tax, they're trying to figure out other ways to fill the hole on the Highway Trust Fund, the Federal Highway Trust Fund. It's always been a user fee. It's worked very well. But what they're trying to do is figure out other ways to fill it. What they've been doing with the continuing resolutions is filling it with general fund money, billions of dollars, the Highway Trust Fund. So they're already using other taxes out there to fill the void. But they're just having a hard time. They will not, at all levels, both sides will not raise the gas tax. That's what, that's what they're
become very
saying.
clear,
It's very clear. Both legislatively and on the administration side, and so, but they're trying to fill the hole. It is interesting that they have a 6-year bill, but they're only talking about 3 years of funding. I call that a 3-year bill, but
yes, that's exactly what it is. Well, it is remarkable, and I think that you mentioned, and even here in the state, as well as the federal level, as much as we value transportation, we also kind of take it for granted because we expect it to be there when we need it. It does require an investment, a continuing investment, and reconciling the value that people place and the reluctance to sometimes raise the dollars. You've done a great job of getting general fund to fill in where highway fund used to be here in the state. it is a challenge that in time we're going to have to overcome because you can only delay and put that off for so long.
That's correct. We are doing quite a bit with what we have. I mean,
Yes, you are.
you could not drive around the state very far this summer without running into an orange barrel or cone somewhere or a sign.
Absolutely.
And so we are doing so much with the funds that we have. A lot of people don't know the cost of
true.
building this infrastructure. We have a lot of structures out there, bridges that were built in the 20s and the 30s that are coming due, but they're very large structures. They cost 11, 12, 20, 30. I mean, Veterans Bridge in Portland, $65 million. Falmouth Martins Point, $25 million. The bridge that we're doing between Kittery and Portsmouth now, $160 million. The one we built a few years ago there, $90 million. And you think about what we receive for federal money, about $160 million a year.
On that
It doesn't
note,
take too many
no,
bridges.
it doesn't. And on that note, I'm going to leave with a congratulations because you certainly made the point. You do an awful lot with a very little. Congratulations, and pass my praise on to the department, would you? They're a
I will.
fantastic team.
Yeah, thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you, Dana.
We're going to be right back with my closing comment right after this. Welcome back. Transportation, we can't get there without it. A shameless play on words, perhaps, but it does allow me to make the point and to emphasize the importance, the role that transportation has on our lives of Maine people, but also it speaks to our livelihood as well. Often referred to as the foundation of our economic system, every one of us in the state knows the need that we have for planes, trains, and automobiles to get us to our destination safely and efficiently. We also know the need that we have for ports, for rail, for highways, to get our products to market, to the far corners of the world, and to do that on time, competitively, and to support our companies. Yes, to understand those needs brings us face to face with the reality that it costs a lot to build and maintain a good transportation system, but it costs a lot more not to. It does cost a lot to maintain our highways. It costs a lot for our ports and for our rail service, but it costs our economy a whole lot more when we don't. We can't afford the cost if we do not make those investments. The bottom line for this month is simply making investments in transportation is making investments in our economy. That is our bottom line for this month. I thank you for being with us. I thank our guests. I look forward to seeing you right back here in December. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving.